I didn't know my life was about to split into before and after until I walked into my own house with a dozen white roses and saw my son's car in the driveway. I was 54, and I'd just dragged myself home from what was supposed to be a 3-day work trip, one of those trips my firm demanded twice a month, the kind that left my spine aching and my head buzzing with client changes and airport delays. I remember thinking, just get inside, surprise him, make it sweet, make it normal again. My husband, Elliot, loved to pretend he didn't care about flowers, but he always softened when I brought home white roses. It was a small ritual, my way of saying, I'm still choosing us, even when my schedule kept pulling me away. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. My son, Dylan, met me halfway down the stairs like he'd been waiting. He took my suitcase a little too quickly, like he was trying to manage the scene. His smile didn't reach his eyes. How was the trip? He asked. Long, I said. Where's your father? Dylan didn't hesitate. Upstairs, shower. The word shower should have sounded ordinary. Instead, it landed like a stone in my stomach. Still, I told myself I was tired, paranoid, overthinking. I held the roses tighter and started up the stairs slowly, feeling the paper crinkle under my fingers, feeling that strange, hopeful rush that comes right before you open a door and expect warmth on the other side. The bedroom door was open. Steam leaked into the hallway. And then I heard it. Laughter. Not Elliot's. A woman's laugh, young and bright, like she had nothing to lose. I stopped with one foot on the top step. My pulse thudded so hard it made my ears ring. For a second, I truly believed there had to be another explanation. Then I pushed the bathroom door open, and there they were, under the water, together. My husband and a woman I had never seen in my life. He turned his head like I was the one interrupting. And my son was downstairs pretending he didn't know. That was the moment I realized betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who smile at you while they're holding the knife. Before that night, if you had asked me to describe my life, I would have used words like stable, earned, maybe even predictable. My name is Margaret Hale. I was 54 years old then, and I owned a mid-size architectural firm I had built from the ground up over 3 decades. Architecture wasn't just my job. It was how my mind worked. I liked clean lines, solid foundations, knowing exactly what could bear weight and what couldn't. I traveled often, usually a few days at a time, chasing contracts, smoothing out projects, fixing problems before they became disasters. That was my role in our marriage. Elliot, my husband, was 48. When we married, he told me he wanted to stay home. He said he wanted to focus on raising our son, managing the household, being present in ways his own father never had been. I didn't argue. I respected the choice. Someone had to keep the home running if I was going to keep the business alive. Our son, Dylan, was born 2 years into the marriage. I remember holding him in the hospital, his tiny fingers curled around mine, thinking I would do anything to give him a life without fear. Elliot was attentive in those early years. School pickups, soccer practices, parent meetings. I was the one missing dinner sometimes, showing up late with apologies and takeout. But it worked, or at least I thought it did. We lived in a house I had bought 2 years before I met Elliot. It had been a wreck back then. Rotting trim, outdated wiring, floors that groaned under your feet. I renovated it myself on weekends, turning it into exactly what I wanted. When Elliot moved in, he said it felt like a real home. I believed him. Before the wedding, my attorney insisted on a prenup. I didn't push back. I'd seen my mother lose everything in her divorce, watched her start over from nothing. The agreement was straightforward. The house and my business would remain mine. Elliot would receive a settlement based on the length of our marriage. He signed without protest, even joked about it being just paperwork. After the wedding, we never spoke of it again. Our marriage, on the surface, was unremarkable. We argued about normal things. Elliot liked redecorating, new curtains, new paint, rearranging furniture every few years. I preferred leaving things as they were. He thought I worked too much. I thought he spent too freely, but none of it felt dangerous. Dylan grew up polite, ambitious. He played soccer in high school, studied business management in college. When he married Isabel, I was relieved. She was kind, thoughtful, and grounded in a way my son sometimes wasn't. The cracks started there. Elliot showed up in their apartment unannounced, rearranged their kitchen cabinets while they were at work, told Isabel she was doing it wrong, but laughed like it was a joke. Isabel complained to Dylan. Dylan defended his father. always. I stayed out of it. I told myself it wasn't my place, that families work things out. Looking back now, that silence was my first real mistake. Because by the time I walked into that bathroom, the betrayal had already been rehearsed for months, and I was the only one still reading from the old script. The truth is, nothing collapsed all at once. It started the way most betrayals do, quietly, politely, hiding behind explanations that sounded reasonable enough if you didn't look too closely. About a year before everything exploded, Elliot began changing in ways I couldn't quite name. Not dramatically, not enough to accuse, just off. He started caring more about his appearance when I was traveling. New gym clothes, a sudden interest in skincare he'd mocked for years. He joked about finally having time to focus on himself, and I laughed along, proud that he felt confident. When I worked late, he didn't complain the way he used to. Instead, he became distant. Short answers, vague updates, distracted tone on the phone. I told myself it was maturity, growth, that we were settling into a quieter phase of marriage. Dylan changed too. He started stopping by the house more often when I was out of town. At first, I thought it was sweet, a grown son making time for his parents. But there was something rehearsed about it, like he was checking a box, making sure he was seen. Once, while I was packing for a trip to Denver, Dylan lingered in the doorway of the bedroom. He watched me fold clothes, clear his throat like he wanted to say something. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. I smiled. "Just tired." He nodded too quickly. "Yeah, you work too much." It felt like a warning disguised as concern. Elliot's spending increased around the same time. Nothing outrageous. Just enough that I noticed. Restaurant charges when I was out of town. Hotel bar tabs I couldn't place. When I asked, he brushed it off. "Book club dinners," he said once. "You know how long those run." I didn't know. I had never asked. The atmosphere in the house shifted. Conversations stopped flowing and started circling. Elliot became oddly defensive about small things. Where I put my keys, how long I stayed in the shower, whether I noticed new throw pillows in the living room. He accused me of not paying attention. And maybe he was right. I was distracted. A major Seattle project had been unraveling for months. Clients changing requirements every week, threatening to pull funding. I was juggling people's egos, budgets, deadlines. By the time I got home, my emotional reserves were gone. Dylan and Isabel's marriage began to strain too. Isabel confided in me once, quietly, while we were alone in the kitchen. She said Elliot made her feel like a guest in her own home, that Dylan always took his father's side. "He says Dad just wants to help," she said, eyes glossy. "But it doesn't feel like help." I told her relationships were complicated, that Dylan loved her, that families took time to adjust. I told her what I needed to believe. The final seed was planted a month before the night I came home early. I called Dylan from the airport during a layover. We chatted about nothing. Work, weather, plans for lunch. He sounded distracted, like he was somewhere else mentally. When I said I'd be home later than expected, there was a pause. "How much later?" he asked. "Late," I said. "Why?" "No reason," he replied quickly. "Just let me know when you land." I remember hanging up and staring at my phone, a knot forming in my stomach I couldn't explain. By the time I landed that night, exhausted and soaked from the rain, the truth was already waiting upstairs, warming the water, rehearsing the lie. And my son had known for a month. I can still remember the exact weight of the roses in my hands. They were heavier than they should have been, the paper damp from the rain, the stems cold against my palm. I stood in the hallway for a second after hearing that laugh, long enough for my mind to scramble for excuses. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then I pushed the bathroom door open. Steam rushed out, thick and warm, fogging my glasses. The smell of soap and something floral that wasn't ours filled my lungs. The shower curtain was half open, and there they were, Elliot and a woman I had never seen before, standing under the water like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, athletic, confident, dark hair slicked back, laughing mid-sentence. She had her hands on his shoulders. He had his hands on her waist. For half a second, no one moved. Then Elliot turned his head. His face didn't register shock first. It registered annoyance, as if I'd walked in without knocking. The woman followed his gaze and froze. Her smile collapsed instantly. She took a step back, water still running over her skin, eyes wide. "Maggie," Elliot started. I dropped the roses. They hit the tile floor softly, almost politely, petals scattering like something fragile being dismantled. "What is this?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded distant, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere behind my ribs. Elliot reached for the curtain, half-heartedly trying to cover her. This isn't... Don't, I said. The word came out sharp enough to cut. The woman wrapped herself in a towel, shaking. Elliot stepped out of the shower, dripping water onto the mat, completely naked and completely unconcerned. He didn't apologize. He sighed. Maggie, calm down, he said. You're making this worse than it needs to be. That was the moment something in me snapped. Not loudly, not violently, but cleanly. Like a wire pulled too tight, finally giving way. How long? I asked. He hesitated. The woman looked at him, then at me, then down at the floor. It doesn't matter, Elliot said. I laughed, a short, broken sound that startled even me. It matters to me. 8 months, he said finally. 8 months. 8 months of hotel charges, of late nights, of my son showing up unannounced, of phone calls that felt slightly wrong. 8 months of my life rewritten behind my back. My knees felt weak. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. And Dylan? I asked. Does he know? The woman's eyes flicked to the door. Elliot didn't answer. I didn't need him to. I turned and walked out of the bathroom, my feet moving on instinct, down the stairs, into the living room. I sat on the couch, hands shaking in my lap, staring at nothing. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. I heard footsteps. The woman came downstairs fully dressed, her face already swelling slightly from crying. She avoided my eyes as she grabbed her bag. I'm sorry, she muttered, not looking at me. Elliot followed her to the door, touching her arm gently. Text me when you get home. The door closed. I stayed seated. When Elliot turned back toward me, I finally looked up. How long has Dylan known? I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I stood up and went upstairs. Dylan was in his old room, sitting on the bed like a child waiting for punishment. Did you know? I asked him. He stared at the floor. A month, he said quietly. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. And you didn't tell me? I didn't know how, he said. She's my father. And I'm your mother, I said. He didn't look up. When I went back downstairs, Elliot was on the phone. The police, he said, meeting my eyes. You attacked someone. I laughed again, this time bitter. You cheated on me in my house. He shrugged. That doesn't give you the right to assault my friend. 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the street. They put handcuffs on me in my own living room. Elliot watched. Dylan stood beside him. Neither of them said a word. And as they led me out into the rain, I realized this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a coordinated one. The cell smelled like bleach and old metal. I sat on the narrow bench with my hands still aching, my knuckles split and throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Every few minutes, the adrenaline would fade just enough for the reality to crash back in, and then surge again, hot and dizzying. I kept replaying the same images on a loop. The steam in the bathroom. Elliot's voice telling me to calm down. Dylan staring at the floor. I wasn't crying. That surprised me. I'd always imagined betrayal would break me open, that I'd collapse into something messy and obvious. Instead, I felt hollowed out, like all the air had been sucked from my lungs and replaced with silence. At some point in the night, an officer slid a paper cup of water through the bars. I thanked him automatically, the way you do when you've spent your life being polite, even when your world is burning. Around dawn, my sister Rachel posted bail. She didn't say anything at first. She just wrapped her arms around me in the parking lot and held on longer than usual. When she pulled back, her eyes were already blazing. What happened? She asked. I told her everything. Not all at once, just pieces, broken and uneven. The affair, the shower, Dylan knowing, the police. Rachel's face hardened with every sentence. By the time I finished, she was gripping the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles were white. I knew he was wrong for you, she said. I just didn't know he was this wrong. We drove to my house in silence. When we got there, my key didn't work. I tried again and again. Rachel stepped forward, calm in a way that frightened me more than yelling. She called a locksmith and put him on speaker. My sister owns the property, she said crisply. Locks were changed without her consent. Yes, we're here now. While we waited, the door opened. Elliot stood there like he belonged, like I was the intruder. What are you doing? He asked. Rachel didn't even look at me before she started listing facts. Dates, ownership, the prenup Elliot had apparently forgotten existed. She spoke like a lawyer, every word sharp and deliberate. The locksmith arrived, changed the locks while Elliot watched. Rachel handed me the new keys. You have 2 hours, she told Elliot. Pack what's yours and leave. He laughed. I'm not going anywhere. Rachel pulled out her phone and started reading the prenup out loud. Elliot stopped laughing. He went upstairs without another word. I sat on the couch, my body heavy, my mind numb. 90 minutes later, he came down with 3 suitcases. He didn't look at me, didn't apologize, didn't say goodbye. When the door closed behind him, the house felt larger, emptier, like sound didn't know where to land anymore. I slept in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Dylan looked away from me. 2 days later, Dylan called. He didn't ask how I was. He yelled. "You had no right to throw him out," he said. "He's my father." "And where were you?" I asked quietly, when I was handcuffed in my living room. "He needed me," Dylan snapped. "And I didn't?" I asked. Silence. I asked him one question before hanging up. "If you came home and found Isabel in the shower with another man, would you still protect her?" "That's different," he said. "How?" I asked. He didn't answer. When the divorce papers were filed a week later, I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted. And exhaustion, I would learn, is what comes right before clarity. The divorce didn't begin with shouting or dramatic courtroom scenes. It began with paperwork. Cold, methodical, relentless paperwork that arrived in neat envelopes and sterile emails, stripping my marriage down to dates, numbers, and signatures. Elliot hired an attorney within days, someone aggressive, someone who smiled too much, and spoke like every sentence was a threat wrapped in politeness. My lawyer warned me early. "They'll try to break the prenup," she said. "They always do." Still, I wasn't prepared for how personal it would become. Elliot's legal strategy wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting history. He claimed he'd sacrificed his career for me, that he'd been financially controlled, that I'd isolated him, made all the decisions, denied him independence. Reading the filings felt like reading a stranger's autobiography written with my name pasted over the villain. Worse than that was how quickly people chose sides. Friends I'd known for decades stopped calling. Some sent awkward texts, "Hope you're okay," without ever asking what actually happened. Others repeated Elliot's version verbatim, like it had come with a script. And then there was Dylan. He moved in with Elliot temporarily, citing support. Isabel wasn't thrilled. She called me one night, voice shaking, asking if what Dylan was saying was true, that I'd controlled the money, that I'd never let Elliot work. I told her the truth, calmly, factually. "I never stopped him," I said. "He chose that life." She went quiet. The court date was set for January. The morning of the hearing, I sat at the polished wooden table in the courtroom, hands folded, spine straight. Elliot sat across from me, not looking at my face. Dylan sat behind him, one row back. When my lawyer told me Dylan was going to testify, my breath caught. "He doesn't have to," I said. "He's not." "He volunteered," she replied. The word volunteered echoed in my head as Dylan took the stand. He looked smaller up there, younger, like he'd shrunk under the weight of what he was about to do. His testimony started softly. He said I was controlling with money, that Elliot had to ask permission for purchases, that I made all the decisions about the house, that I refused to let Elliot work, even when he wanted to. Each lie landed like a stone dropped into still water. No sound at first, just ripples spreading outward. I didn't react, I didn't cry, I didn't interrupt. I watched my son dismantle me in front of strangers with practiced calm. Then came cross-examination. My lawyer's voice was steady, precise. "Were you aware your father had been having an affair for 8 months?" she asked. Dylan hesitated. "Yes." "Did you know marital funds were used to pay for hotel rooms and gifts for the woman involved?" "No," he said quickly. That's when the receipts came out. Hotel charges, always when I was out of town. Restaurant bills for 2. On nights I was in another state. A gym membership in a name that wasn't Elliot's. An $800 charge at a men's clothing store for sizes that didn't match my husband. The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. When Elliot was asked to explain, his answers unraveled. He couldn't name the friends he claimed to dine with. He couldn't explain why the hotel was always booked during my trips. He couldn't explain why marital money was used to buy someone else a wardrobe. The judge didn't interrupt. She just watched. Neighbors testified. My business partner testified. Rachel testified about spending patterns, about Elliot's interference in Dylan and Isabel's marriage, about the night the locks were changed. By the end of the day, Elliot's confidence was gone. 2 weeks later, the ruling came down. The prenup stood. The house was mine. The business was mine. Elliot received a settlement based on the years of marriage, $75,000. And he was ordered to repay nearly $9,000 spent on the affair. Elliot didn't look angry when the judge read the decision. He looked empty. Dylan put an arm around him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. That weekend I wrote a post, not out of spite, not for revenge, for clarity. I laid out the timeline, the charges, the lies. Dylan's testimony, the proof that contradicted it all. I posted it Saturday morning and turned off my phone. When I checked it Sunday night, there were hundreds of comments. Support, outrage, silence. I didn't respond to any of it, because the escalation wasn't over. It was just changing shape. The house was too quiet after that. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your ears, makes every small sound feel intrusive. The refrigerator hum, the click of the thermostat, my own footsteps echoing through rooms that used to hold conversations I didn't even realize I'd memorized. I had won in court. That's what people kept saying. Rachel said it, my lawyer said it, even strangers online said it, calling me strong, composed, admirable. But strength, I learned, doesn't feel like victory when it costs you your family. The darkest moment didn't come during the trial or the arrest or even the night I found Elliot in the shower. It came afterward. It came when nothing else was happening. I slept in the guest room every night, curled toward the wall, like I was borrowing space in my own house. I avoided the master bedroom entirely. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed time. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear the idea of lying down in a place where I'd trusted someone so completely. Dylan stopped calling. At first, I checked my phone instinctively, then less often, then not at all. One evening, after work, I sat at the kitchen counter eating soup, straight from the container, scrolling through photos on my tablet. I found one from Dylan's college graduation. Elliot and I stood on either side of him, smiling, proud. I stared at that image for a long time, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it stopped being real. I took the photo out of its frame and put it in a drawer. That was the night I cried for the first time. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears slipping down my face as I leaned against the counter, one hand gripping the edge like it was the only solid thing left. A few days later, Isabel called. Her voice was careful, like she was stepping onto unstable ground. She asked if what I'd posted was true. I told her yes. She asked why Dylan would lie in court. I told her she'd have to ask him that. That call ended something I didn't realize I was still holding together. Within weeks, Isabel filed for separation. Dylan moved back in with Elliot. Their daughter went to stay with Isabel's parents. Dylan called me 6 times in one day after that. I didn't answer. He left voicemails, pleading, angry, desperate. He said I was destroying his family, that I was punishing him for choosing his father, that Elliot had nowhere to go, no money, no support. I listened to one message, just one, then I deleted the rest. When Elliot called, it was worse. His voice sounded smaller, thinner. He said he was barely making rent, that he was working at a grocery store, that his car had broken down, that the settlement money was almost gone. He asked if I could loan him a few $1,000s, just until he got back on his feet. I asked him one question. Is she helping you? He went quiet. She doesn't want anything to do with this anymore, he said finally. I told him that was a consequence, not a tragedy. He cried. I hung up. That night, I sat alone on the couch, lights off, staring at the dark television screen like it might reflect something back to me, some version of myself that knew what came next. I didn't feel empowered. I felt emptied out. The marriage was gone. My relationship with my son was fractured beyond recognition. The life I'd built, carefully, patiently, had collapsed inward. For the first time since I was young, I didn't know who I was without the roles I'd been performing. And in that uncertainty, in that quiet, hollow space, I finally understood something terrifying and true. Letting go doesn't feel brave. It feels like standing in the dark, hoping you're still standing when the lights come back on. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic speech. It arrived quietly on a Thursday evening in a beige room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Anger management class? I almost didn't go. By then, the assault charge had been reduced to a plea deal. 12 weeks of classes, some community service, no jail time. My lawyer recommended it, said it was the cleanest way to close that chapter. I agreed because I was tired of fighting. That night I sat in the back row, arms crossed, listening to people talk about bar fights, neighbor disputes, tempers that flared and exploded outward. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it vague. I reacted, I said, and it got out of control. The instructor nodded. What was taken from you in that moment? The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, ready with the obvious answers, my dignity, my marriage, my reputation, but nothing came out. What I felt instead was something deeper and colder. My agency, that's what had been stolen. Not just by Elliot's betrayal, but by Dylan's silence, by the lies told in court, by the way everyone else decided who I was without asking me. I drove home afterward and didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. For the first time in months, my thoughts weren't racing. They were clear. I realized I had been waiting for something, an apology that would make sense of everything, a moment of accountability that would undo the damage. But none of that was coming, and I didn't need it to move forward. The next morning, I made decisions I'd been postponing. I boxed up the photos of Elliot from the walls, wedding pictures, vacations, posed smiles that now felt like evidence from another life. I didn't destroy them. I didn't dramatize the process. I placed them carefully in a box and labeled it garage. I converted the master bedroom into a workspace, not because I needed the office, but because I needed the reclaiming. I moved my drafting table in, hung my own work on the walls, opened the windows, and let the light in until the room felt like it belonged to me again. That same week, my firm landed 2 major contracts. I hired another architect, Patricia, experienced, sharp, unafraid to challenge my ideas. Working with her reminded me who I was before my marriage became my primary identity. Then came the letter. Dylan sent it to my office, 3 pages long, folded carefully. My assistant asked if I wanted her to open it. I said no. I read it alone. He apologized for lying in court, said he panicked, said he assumed I'd be fine because I had resources, said Elliot had nothing without me. The words didn't hurt the way I expected them to. They clarified. Dylan wanted reconciliation on his terms. He wanted me to smooth things over, to convince Isabel, to absorb the consequences so he wouldn't have to. I placed the letter in a drawer and closed it. When Isabel called later that month, her voice steadier than before, she asked if she was doing the right thing by continuing with the divorce. I can't answer that for you, I said honestly. She thanked me anyway. After that call, I sat in my office and looked at a single photo I'd left out, Dylan's graduation. I removed it from the frame and placed it beside the letter. Not as punishment, as truth. The turning point wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about choosing not to keep negotiating my worth with people who had already spent it. For the first time since that night in the bathroom, I felt grounded. Not healed, but standing. Consequences don't arrive all at once. They spread. They seep into conversations, living rooms, workplaces, into the spaces where people used to feel safe pretending nothing had happened. Elliot unraveled quietly at first. Rachel told me he was staying in a roadside motel near the highway, that the $75,000 from the settlement was evaporating faster than anyone expected. He bought new furniture for Dylan's apartment, paid for dinners he couldn't afford, tried to keep up appearances long after the audience had left. Within 3 months, the money was nearly gone. Dylan called. I didn't answer. He emailed. I blocked him. Then came the court filings. Elliot's attorney requested a modification to the settlement, claiming Elliot couldn't survive on what he'd received. My lawyer forwarded me the email with a single line attached. This won't go anywhere. She was right. The judge denied the request within 48 hours. Around the same time, the assault charge finalized. I accepted the plea deal. 12 weeks of anger management, community service, no jail time. It was the last legal thread tying me to that night. Meanwhile, the story I posted online kept moving without me. Friends distanced themselves from Elliot. Neighbors stopped greeting him. People who had defended him early on grew quieter once the receipts circulated. Truth has a way of exhausting denial. The fallout reached Dylan next. Isabel filed for divorce in February. She told him she couldn't trust someone who could lie under oath and hide an affair while it lived under her roof. Their daughter stayed with her parents. Dylan moved again, this time alone. He called me 6 times in one day after that. I didn't answer. When he finally stopped calling, he sent an email accusing me of destroying his family, of punishing him for supporting his father, of caring more about pride than people. I read it once. Then I deleted it. By March, Elliot called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I thought it might be work-related. His voice sounded smaller, worn down. He asked if I'd meet him for coffee. I said no. He called again an hour later, crying. Told me he was barely making rent, that he was working for $12 an hour, that his car was broken, that Dylan had stopped helping him after Isabel gave him an ultimatum. Cut Elliot off completely, or the divorce would proceed. He asked me for money, $2,000 or $3,000, just enough to get through a few months. I asked him if the woman from the shower was helping him. Silence. She doesn't want anything to do with this anymore, he said. I told him that was his responsibility, not mine. He begged. I ended the call. At work, life moved forward. The firm grew. Patricia and I landed another contract. People stopped asking about my personal life and started asking about deadlines again. I preferred it that way. Rachel noticed the change. "You're different," she said one night over dinner. "Focused," I corrected. She didn't argue. The fallout wasn't dramatic. There were no public apologies, no grand realizations. Just the slow erosion of the life Elliot and Dylan thought would always be there to catch them. Isabel sent me a photo of my granddaughter, standing unsteadily, arms outstretched, smiling at something just beyond the frame. She wrote that I could visit whenever I wanted. I stared at the photo for a long time. I didn't reply. Not yet. I wasn't withholding love. I was learning how to offer it without losing myself again. And that, I realized, was the most permanent consequence of all. Life didn't reset after everything ended. It settled. The anger management classes finished in June. On the last night, the instructor signed my completion form, shook my hand, and wished me well. I drove home, placed the certificate in a folder with the court documents, and slid it into a drawer I rarely opened. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to keep reliving it. The house feels different now. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. I eat dinner at the kitchen counter, tablet propped up beside my plate. I go to bed when I'm tired. I wake up when the alarm rings. There's no negotiation about weekend plans or television shows or whether something needs to be talked through. Peace, I've learned, isn't loud. I finally took down the last photos of Elliot. There were more than I expected. Weddings, vacations, family portraits with Dylan. I packed them into a box and placed it in the garage beside the others. I didn't cry this time. When I think about Dylan now, it's not with rage. It's with grief. The kind that understands you can love someone and still accept that the relationship you had no longer exists. He emails occasionally. I don't read them. Maybe someday I will. Maybe not. Isabel sends photos of my granddaughter every few weeks. I save them all. I haven't visited yet, not because I don't care, but because I'm learning how to show up whole instead of bleeding. When I do step back into that role, I want it to be from strength, not obligation. Work keeps me grounded. The firm is thriving. Patricia challenges me in the best ways. I'm building things again, real things, with purpose and clarity. Rachel says I seem withdrawn. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm finally listening to myself instead of the noise around me. I'm not searching for a new beginning. I'm not dating. I'm not trying to replace what I lost. I'm just living. Some days are heavy, others are easy, most are somewhere in between. And that's enough. Because the lesson I carry forward is simple, even if it took me decades to learn it. Love without honesty is not loyalty. Silence in the face of betrayal is not peace. And choosing yourself, quietly, firmly, is not cruelty. It's survival. And for now, survival is more than enough.